Ever feel like you're suddenly doing things completely out of character?
Yeah.
Like snapping at your partner over nothing,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe making impulsive decisions,
Right.
or even like craving things you swore you'd never touch.
Oh, yeah.
It's almost like some invisible force is pushing you in like a wild direction.
Yeah.
That's what we're diving into today.
Okay.
The spring theory.
That's right.
We're looking at the spring theory, emotional and life tension.
Okay.
It suggests that all this unresolved emotional tension from our past,
Yeah.
you know, limitations,
Mm-hmm.
trauma, unmet needs from childhood,
Mm-hmm.
it kind of builds up over time,
It does.
like a compressed spring.
Like a compressed spring, exactly.
And eventually that spring can release
Yes.
in some pretty unexpected
Yeah.
and sometimes destructive ways.
Unpredictable for sure.
Okay, so are we talking midlife crisis here?
Well,
Is that the spring going by?
it can be a part of it.
Okay.
It can definitely play a role in those classic midlife upheavals,
Right.
but it's broader than that. So think about it.
Okay.
Maybe you were super sheltered growing up,
Ah.
never allowed to date
Yeah.
or make your own choices.
Right.
That's like winding the spring super tight.
Okay.
Or maybe you had to be the responsible one way too young,
Yeah.
always taking care of siblings
Yeah.
or dealing with adult problems.
Yeah.
That's compressing the spring under a heavy weight.
Okay.
Then boom, adulthood hits.
Right.
Maybe a big life change.
Yeah.
And that spring recoils.
So it's not just about age.
No.
It's about that pressure finally finding a way out.
It is.
Exactly. And the way it unwinds can be really fascinating.
Yeah.
So someone with that sheltered youth spring
Yeah.
might suddenly jump into a whirlwind romance,
It's possible.
craving that freedom they never had.
Mm-hmm.
But someone with an overburdened youth spring might resist commitment,
Yeah.
fearing they'll lose their hard-earned independence.
Makes sense.
So even though the root cause is similar,
Yeah.
that unresolved tension, it can play out in totally opposite ways.
It can.
And relationships are where this gets really interesting
Yes.
and sometimes messy.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about that messy part.
Okay.
Because the spring theory, emotional and life tension,
Yeah.
it doesn't shy away from how this can impact our partnerships.
No, it doesn't.
So it's like this.
Okay.
Imagine you're in a relationship with someone
Yeah.
and their spring is about to release.
Okay.
You might feel like you're walking on eggshells,
Yeah, you would.
never knowing what mood to expect.
Exactly.
Like 1 minute, it's intense closeness.
Mm-hmm.
The next, it's total withdrawal.
Yeah.
Sounds exhausting
It is.
and confusing. Like,
Yeah.
is this about me
Right.
or is this their spring acting up?
That's the tricky part.
Yeah.
It can be hard to tell,
Yeah.
especially if they're not aware of what's driving their behavior.
Right.
And this is where things can get even more complicated.
Okay.
Because that need to control that spring, it can spill over into the relationship.
So like trying to micromanage every detail,
Yeah.
maybe needing constant reassurance,
Exactly.
or even
So
pushing back against any kind of restriction.
it's all about control.
Right.
Trying to create order and stability outside themselves because they lack it inside.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, sometimes this can lead to seeking validation outside the relationship altogether.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
If you're feeling emotionally unstable,
Right.
maybe attention from others,
Yeah.
or chasing social status might seem like a quick fix.
Right.
But obviously not a sustainable solution for a healthy relationship.
No, definitely not.
So the spring theory, emotional and life tension, mentions defense mechanisms,
Yes.
particularly repression,
Right.
as a way of keeping that spring wound extra tight.
Absolutely.
Like pretending everything is fine
Mm-hmm.
when you're actually like a pressure cooker about to explode.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that's where therapy can be so valuable.
It can.
It's like having a trained professional help you slowly and safely release that pressure,
Yeah.
process those emotions, and develop healthier coping mechanisms.
Yeah, therapy can be a really useful tool in this.
So therapy's like learning to unwind that spring constructively
Yeah.
instead of letting it snap in all directions.
Yes, exactly.
And the source material also points to the importance of addressing any past trauma,
It does.
because these experiences add even more coils to that spring,
Yeah, they do.
making the release potentially more chaotic.
Right.
So if someone hasn't dealt with past trauma,
Mm-hmm.
could midlife be like a perfect storm
It could.
for that spring to really unleash?
Absolutely.
And it can manifest in some unhealthy ways.
It can.
The spring theory, emotional and life tension, specifically mentions substance use and dependence as a potential symptom.
Yeah.
It's almost like trying to numb the pain of that release or recapture a sense of control that feels lost.
Exactly.
But here's the important thing.
Okay.
Even though that midlife period or any time of major transition can be a trigger for the spring to unwind in a difficult way,
Yeah,
it could also be a turning point.
it can.
It's like hitting rock bottom can sometimes be the push you need to finally do the work.
It can be, for sure.
It could be a catalyst for recognizing that underlying tension,
Yeah.
seeking help, and building a more authentic life.
Absolutely.
So how do we navigate this tension,
Right.
especially in relationships?
Yeah.
Because let's be real,
Okay.
none of us get through life without some emotional baggage.
That's true. That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Right.
And the spring theory, emotional and life tension, offers some really insightful guidance on this.
Okay.
One thing that stood out to me
Yeah.
is this idea that relationships, they can be both a source of tension
Okay.
and a powerful tool for healing.
Interesting.
It's like this double-edged sword.
Okay, so our relationships can either wind us up tighter or help us unwind.
Yeah.
So how do we make sure they're doing the latter?
Well, it starts with understanding how those springs interact.
Okay.
So let's say you're someone with that overburdened youth spring.
Mm-hmm.
You've always been the responsible one.
Yeah.
Maybe you've been emotionally reserved.
Right.
And you're partnered with someone who has that sheltered youth spring.
Okay.
They're impulsive, craving new experiences.
Ooh. That sounds like a potential clash.
It could be.
Yeah.
Without awareness, their spontaneity might trigger your need for control,
Right.
and your cautiousness might dampen their adventurous spirit.
Makes sense.
But here's where it gets interesting.
Okay.
What if, instead of seeing those differences as threats,
Yeah.
you see them as opportunities for growth?
Okay. I'm intrigued.
Yeah.
How do we turn a potential clash into a growth opportunity?
Communication is key, of course.
Right.
But it's more than just talking.
Yeah.
It's about understanding each other's spring type, recognizing those patterns,
Yeah.
and having compassion for where those behaviors are coming from.
Okay.
So maybe the impulsive partner
Learns to give the responsible one a heads up
Right.
before making big decisions.
Yeah.
And the cautious partner learns to loosen the reins a bit,
Yeah.
trusting that their partner won't lead them astray.
So it's about finding that balance
It is.
between honoring your own needs
Yeah,
and supporting your partner's growth.
exactly.
And that's where attachment theory comes in.
yes.
It's all about how our early relationships
Right.
shape our ability to form secure attachments in adulthood.
exact.
So if someone had inconsistent caregiving growing up, their spring might be extra sensitive
Yeah.
to any perceived threat of abandonment.
It might.
So they might be more prone to jealousy,
Yeah,
clinginess, or constantly needing reassurance from their partner.
that's right.
And their partner, especially if they have a more secure attachment style,
Yeah,
might feel suffocated or misunderstood.
exact.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah,
So many relationship conflicts probably boil down to these mismatched attachment styles.
they do.
Right. But the good news is
Yeah.
we can learn to recognize our own attachment patterns and develop healthier ways of relating.
So it's like learning a new language,
It is.
the language of emotional intimacy.
Yes, that's a great way to put it.
And speaking of languages,
Okay.
let's not forget the sociological side of things.
Right.
The spring theory, emotional and life tension, mentions the concept of face work
Yes.
from sociologist Irving Goffman.
Right.
It's the idea that we're constantly managing our emotional expressions in social situations
Yes, we are.
to present a certain image.
Exactly.
So like we're all wearing these masks,
We are.
even in our closest relationships.
To some extent, yes.
Okay.
And while some degree of face work is necessary for smooth social interactions,
Yeah.
it can become a problem
Right.
when we're suppressing our true feelings to maintain that facade.
Right, because that just adds more pressure to that spring.
It does.
It's like wearing a costume that's too tight.
Uh-huh.
Eventually, you just want to rip it off and breathe.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that's where authenticity comes in.
It is.
So the more we can show up as our genuine selves in our relationships,
Yeah.
the less tension we'll carry.
That's right.
It's about finding that sweet spot
Yeah.
between being socially appropriate
Mm-hmm.
and being true to who we are.
Exactly.
So how do we start unwinding that spring in a healthy way?
Yeah.
What are some tangible steps we can take?
The spring theory, emotional and life tension, offers some excellent guidance on that.
Okay.
And it all starts with recognizing the warning signs.
All right, so what are the warning signs?
Well, are you feeling constantly on edge?
Okay.
snapping at your loved ones over nothing, having trouble sleeping,
Yeah.
or maybe even turning to unhealthy coping mechanisms,
Like what?
like excessive drinking or emotional eating.
Okay, so those are the red flags.
They are.
What do we do when we see them?
Well, it's all about interrupting those unhealthy patterns
Okay.
and replacing them with constructive ones. So, the spring theory, emotional and life tension, emphasizes the importance of self-care.
Right.
Things like exercise, spending time in nature,
Okay.
or engaging in creative pursuits can help us release tension in a healthy way.
So it's not selfish to take time for ourselves?
Not at all. It's essential.
Okay.
Think of it like this.
Okay.
You can't pour from an empty cup.
Right.
So taking care of our own emotional well-being allows us to show up more fully for our partners and loved ones.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
And it's not just about individual self-care, right? We
Yeah,
talked
yeah.
earlier about the importance of connecting with others.
Yes.
So sometimes just talking to a trusted friend,
Right.
family member,
Mm-hmm.
or therapist can help us process our emotions and gain a fresh perspective.
Absolutely.
And in some cases, joining a support group can be incredibly powerful.
It can be.
It's like that saying, a burden shared is a burden halved.
That's right.
And let's not forget the power of professional help. Therapists can provide tools and guidance
Yes.
to help us unpack those deeply ingrained patterns, process past trauma, and develop healthier coping strategies.
Exactly.
It's like having a skilled guide
It is.
to help us navigate that inner wilderness and emerge stronger and more resilient.
That's the goal.
Right. And that's really the ultimate goal, isn't it?
Yeah.
To use those challenges, those moments when the spring feels like it's about to snap,
Yeah.
as opportunities for growth and transformation.
They are opportunities for growth.
And that brings us to another key concept,
Okay.
understanding the different ways we cope with stress.
All right.
This feels especially relevant in today's world.
It does.
It seems like everyone is stressed out about something.
That's true.
So the spring theory, emotional and life tension, draws on the stress and coping theory
Yeah.
developed by Lazarus and Folkman, which suggests that stress arises when we feel like we can't cope with the demands placed upon us. And the way we choose to cope can either increase or decrease that tension.
Exactly.
So some coping mechanisms are more helpful than others.
They are.
Right? The spring theory, emotional and life tension, distinguishes between problem-focused coping
Yes.
and emotion-focused coping. Problem-focused coping is about taking action to address the source of the stress.
Right.
So if work is stressing you out,
Yeah.
maybe you set clearer boundaries with your boss or look for a new job.
Yeah.
So you're tackling the problem head on.
Exactly.
But then there's emotion-focused coping,
Right.
which is about managing your emotional response to the stressor.
Yes.
So instead of trying to change the situation, you're focusing on regulating your feelings.
That's right.
So things like meditation, deep breathing exercises, or journaling can be helpful here.
Yeah, those can be really helpful.
And while emotion-focused coping can be beneficial in the short term,
Yes.
it's important to make sure it doesn't become a way to avoid addressing the underlying issue. It's like putting a Band-Aid on a wound that needs stitches.
Right.
It might provide temporary relief,
Yeah.
but it won't truly heal.
Ah, that's a great analogy.
And this is where the spring theory comes back into play.
Yes, it does.
If we're constantly using avoidance or denial to cope with stress, that tension is just going to keep building up inside,
It will.
making that spring even tighter.
Right.
So it's about finding a balance
It is.
between managing our emotions and taking action to address the stressors in our lives.
Exactly.
And that's where self-awareness comes in again.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing our own coping patterns
Right.
and making sure they're serving us in the long run.
That's right.
It's about being honest with ourselves and
Yeah.
having the courage to face those challenges head on
Yeah.
rather than letting them fester and control us.
Right.
And I imagine this is especially important in relationships
It is.
because our partner can often be a mirror reflecting back those unhealthy patterns.
That's true.
Right. And that's what makes the next part of the spring theory, emotional and life tension, so crucial.
Okay.
It's about understanding how our individual springs interact with each other in a relationship.
Exactly.
So it's not just about managing our own spring.
Right.
It's about navigating the interplay of two springs.
Yes.
And sometimes those springs can clash.
It can.
Like we talked about earlier. If you've got someone with a tightly wound-sheltered youth spring, paired with someone with a compressed, overburdened youth spring,
Right.
there's bound to be some friction.
There is.
It's like those two springs are pushing against each other, creating this unstable energy.
Yeah.
But here's the thing.
Okay.
Even though those differences can create challenges,
Yeah.
they can also be a source of incredible strength and growth in a relationship.
They can.
Okay, so
Well.
I'm seeing the potential for conflict, but I'm curious about the strength part.
It all comes down to awareness,
Okay.
communication, and a willingness to learn from each other.
Right.
So what if instead of trying to change our partner's spring, we see it as a unique perspective that can enrich our own lives?
So instead of saying you're too impulsive,
Right.
you might say, wow, your spontaneity is so refreshing. It
Exactly.
reminds me to loosen up and enjoy the moment.
Yeah.
And the impulsive partner, instead of feeling judged, might start to appreciate the value of their partner's groundedness and stability.
That's right.
So it's about recognizing that those differences,
Yes.
those contrasting springs, can actually complement each other, creating a more dynamic and balanced whole.
Exactly.
And that's where the real magic happens in relationships.
It
We
is.
start to see our partner's spring not as a threat, but as a teacher.
That's beautiful.
Right. I love that.
Yeah.
So how do we put this into practice?
Wow.
How do we start seeing those differences as assets rather than liabilities? So we're back wrapping up our deep dive into the spring theory, emotional and life tension.
Yes, we are.
And I have to say, knowing that our partners aren't trying to annoy us,
Right.
that their behavior might be rooted in their own spring, that's a game changer.
It is.
But how do we actually make this work in our relationships?
Yeah, that's the key question, isn't it?
Right.
It's one thing to understand the theory, but how do we apply it
Right.
to create healthier, more fulfilling connections?
Exactly. Because let's be real.
Okay.
Knowing about springs is great.
Yeah.
But if it doesn't help us stop arguing over who unloaded the dishwasher correctly,
Right.
what's the point?
I hear you.
Right.
And the spring theory, emotional and life tension, actually offers some really practical strategies
Right.
for putting this knowledge into action.
Okay. I'm all ears. Give me the actionable steps.
Well, first and foremost, it all comes down to awareness.
Okay.
We've talked about recognizing our own spring, our own patterns,
Right.
but it's equally important to start tuning into our partner's spring.
So instead of just reacting to their behavior, we take a step back and we ask ourselves, okay, what's their spring doing here?
Exactly.
Right.
So let's say your partner is suddenly withdrawing emotionally,
Okay.
becoming distant and unresponsive.
Right.
Your initial reaction might be hurt,
Yeah.
maybe even anger. Why are they shutting me out? What did I do?
I know that feeling all too well.
Right.
It's so easy to personalize it.
It is.
Yeah.
But what if instead of jumping to those conclusions,
Okay.
you pause and consider their spring?
Okay.
Maybe they have that overburdened youth spring and they're feeling overwhelmed, needing some space to recharge.
So their withdrawal isn't necessarily a rejection.
Right.
It's just their way of coping with stress.
Exactly.
And that shift in perspective can make all the difference.
It can.
Instead of feeling resentful, you might offer them some understanding and support.
Right.
Like, hey, I notice you seem a little withdrawn lately.
Yeah.
Is everything okay?
Right here.
Do you need some time to yourself?
Exactly.
That changes the whole dynamic, doesn't it?
It does.
Instead of conflict, there's this sense of empathy and connection.
That's the power of the spring theory.
Right.
It helps us move beyond blame and judgment and approach our relationships with curiosity and compassion.
So awareness is key.
It is.
What else can we do to navigate those spring-related challenges?
Well, communication, of course.
Oh.
But again, it's not just about talking.
Right.
It's about talking skillfully.
Okay.
So the spring theory, emotional and life tension, emphasizes the importance of using I statements
Okay.
to express our feelings without attacking our partner.
So instead of saying you're always so controlling,
Right.
it's more like, I'm feeling a bit stifled right now.
Yes.
Could we talk about finding a balance that works for both of us?
Perfect example.
Right.
It's about owning your experience without blaming your partner.
Right.
And equally important is active listening, truly hearing and understanding your partner's perspective. Yeah.
even if you don't agree with it.
Because remember, their behavior is likely stemming from their spring,
Exactly.
not from a desire to hurt you.
Right.
And that leads us to another crucial piece.
Okay.
Setting healthy boundaries.
Yeah, setting boundaries is so important.
So it's about creating a space where both partners feel safe and respected while also honoring their individual needs.
Exactly.
So if your partner has that sheltered youth spring,
Yeah.
and they're constantly craving excitement and spontaneity, you might set a boundary around how last-minute plans can be made.
Right.
So it's not about controlling them.
No.
It's about finding a compromise
Exactly.
that allows them to express their need for freedom while also respecting your need for structure and predictability.
That's a good point.
Right.
Boundaries are so important.
They're like the guardrails that keep the relationship on track,
Yes, they are.
preventing those springs from clashing too violently.
Exactly. And remember, setting boundaries isn't just about saying no.
It's also about communicating your needs clearly and assertively.
So if you're the one with that overburdened youth spring and you're feeling overwhelmed,
Yeah.
you might say, hey, I'm feeling a bit overloaded right now.
Yeah.
Would you mind taking on a few extra tasks this week?
Exactly. It's about asking for what you need
Right.
in a way that's respectful and collaborative.
And that's where that shared purpose we talked about earlier comes into play.
It does.
When you have a shared vision for the future, it's easier to work through those challenges as a team.
Yes, it is.
It's like remembering that you're both rowing the same boat,
Right.
even if you're using slightly different strokes.
I like that analogy.
And speaking of rowing, let's not forget the importance of self-care in all of this.
Yeah. Self-care is so important.
We talked about individual self-care, but there's also relationship self-care.
That's right.
What are you doing together to nurture the connection,
Yeah.
to de-stress and recharge as a couple? So it's not just about taking care of ourselves individually.
Wow.
It's about prioritizing quality time together,
Yes.
doing things we both enjoy,
That's right.
whether it's going for a hike, trying a new restaurant,
Yeah.
or just cuddling up on the couch and watching a movie.
Those are all great.
Those shared experiences can create a sense of intimacy and joy
They can.
that helps buffer against those inevitable moments of tension.
It's like building up a reserve of positive emotions
Right.
to draw on when those springs start to get a little wobbly.
And remember, the spring theory, emotional and life tension, is just one lens for understanding relationships.
It is.
There's so many other factors at play,
There are.
from personality traits to communication styles to life experiences.
Right. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution.
Exactly.
But it's a powerful tool for gaining self-awareness, understanding our partners,
Yeah.
and navigating those inevitable challenges that arise in any relationship.
And ultimately, it's about remembering that we're all in this together.
We are.
We all have those springs,
Yeah.
those patterns, those unresolved wounds.
That's true.
And by bringing compassion and understanding to ourselves and our partners, we can create relationships that are not only fulfilling, but also transformative.
That's a great point.
That's a beautiful thought to end on.
It is.
And on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive into the spring theory, emotional and life tension.
We have.
We hope this exploration has been insightful and helpful for you.
I hope so.
Remember, even the tightest spring can be unwound.
Yeah.
And those moments of release can lead to incredible growth, connection, and joy.
They can.
Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.